Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where lost truths, ancient mysteries, and forbidden history collide. Let's question the past and uncover what was never meant to be found. In the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, scientists found fields of twisted, blackened glass. For years, its origin was a mystery. Now, mineral analysis reveals it was created by a comet exploding in our atmosphere 12,000 years ago. In the northern reaches of Chile, stretching for nearly 1,000 kilometers between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean, lies the Atacama Desert. It is a land of superlatives, renowned as the driest non-polar desert in the world. In some areas, rainfall has never been recorded, and the landscape is a stark, almost lunar expanse of barren rock, salt flats, and ochre-colored sand. It is a place that seems hostile to life, a geological canvas where processes unfold over millennia, seemingly untouched by sudden or violent change. Yet, scattered across a specific corridor of this hyperarid environment, scientists have discovered evidence of a cataclysmic event, a moment of unimaginable heat and force that scarred the landscape forever. This evidence takes the form of vast, enigmatic fields of twisted, blackened glass. For decades, the origin of this mysterious Atacama glass was a subject of intense scientific debate, a puzzle that defied easy explanation. The investigation into its creation would lead geologists down a path of ruling out terrestrial causes, only to be confronted by a cosmic mystery of immense proportions. The discovery of the Atacama glass was not a single event, but a gradual realization of the scale and strangeness of the phenomenon. Geologists and prospectors working in the desert had long been aware of these unusual glassy deposits, but they were often dismissed as localized curiosities. It was only through systematic surveying and mapping that the true extent of the glass fields became apparent. The glass is primarily found within a well-defined, north-south trending corridor, approximately 75 kilometers long, located east of a place called Pampa del Tamarugal. Within this corridor, the glass is not found as a continuous sheet, but as scattered fields of individual specimens, ranging in size from tiny sand-like grains to large, contorted slabs weighing several kilograms. The total quantity of glass is immense, estimated to be many thousands of tons, spread over hundreds of square kilometers. The appearance of the glass itself is what immediately pointed to a violent and high-temperature origin. This is not the clear, smooth obsidian associated with some volcanic eruptions. The Atacama glass is typically dark green to black in color, opaque, and has a rough, pitted surface. Crucially, its structure is incredibly complex. The pieces are often folded, twisted, stretched, and contorted into bizarre sculptural forms. Many specimens contain trapped bubbles of gas, indicating that the parent material was heated so rapidly that gases within it expanded violently before the substance could cool and solidify. This morphology is a clear fingerprint of a material that was flash melted at extremely high temperatures and then cooled very quickly, freezing it in its contorted, molten state. The very form of the glass screamed of a sudden high-energy event. The central question for geologists was, what kind of event could have generated the immense heat needed to melt tons of desert sand across such a vast area? The first and most obvious suspect for such a high-temperature event was volcanism. The Andes Mountains, which form the eastern border of the Atacama, are a volcanically active range. A massive explosive eruption, known as a pyroclastic flow, could theoretically generate the temperatures needed to melt surface materials. However, this theory was quickly ruled out. Geochemical analysis of the Atacama glass showed that its composition was almost identical to the local desert soil, a sandy, silica-rich sediment known as loess. It was not derived from a magmatic source deep within the earth. Furthermore, there were no large, explosive volcanoes of the correct age located nearby. The glass was clearly formed from the in-situ melting of the desert floor itself, not from material ejected by a distant volcano. With volcanism dismissed, researchers turned their attention to another potential cause: massive wildfires. It is known that intense grass fires, particularly those involving grasses with a high silica content, can sometimes produce small amounts of glassy material called fulgurites. The theory proposed that at some point in the past when the Atacama was less arid, vast wildfires could have swept across the region, melting the silica-rich soil. This explanation, however, faced two major problems. First, the temperatures required to create the specific type of glass found in the Atacama are extremely high, well over 1,500 degrees Celsius. While a large wildfire is intensely hot, it is unlikely to sustain temperatures this high over such a wide area. Second, and more importantly, the sheer volume of the glass was simply too great to be explained by burning grass. The fields contain thousands of tons of material. To produce this much glass would have required the incineration of an impossibly vast and dense grassland, for which there is no geological or paleobotanical evidence. The grass fire hypothesis simply could not account for the scale of the phenomenon. This process of elimination led geologists to consider a more dramatic and exotic possibility: an extraterrestrial impact. The idea that an object from space, such as a meteorite or an asteroid, could strike the Earth with enough force to melt surface rock into glass was well established. The most famous example of this is Libyan desert glass, a beautiful yellowish-green glass found in the Sahara Desert, which is now known to have been formed by a massive meteorite impact around 29 million years ago. Another example is the glass found at the Trinity nuclear test site in New Mexico, known as trinitite, which was formed by the intense heat of the atomic bomb melting the desert sand. The Atacama glass, with its high formation temperature and its composition matching the local soil, seemed like a perfect candidate for an impact glass, or impactite. This theory was compelling and seemed to fit many of the facts. It would explain the high temperatures, the suddenness of the event, and the vast area affected. A large object striking the Atacama would have released an enormous amount of kinetic energy, instantly vaporizing and melting the desert floor in a fiery explosion. The team of scientists investigating the glass, led by researchers from Brown University and the Chilean Geological Survey, set out to find the one crucial piece of evidence that would confirm this theory: the impact crater. They conducted extensive field surveys, used satellite imagery, and analyzed topographical maps, searching for the telltale circular depression that a large impactor would have left behind. They found nothing. There was no crater. There were no smaller secondary craters, and there was no evidence of the shocked quartz or other high-pressure minerals that are the definitive signature of a hypervelocity impact. The absence of a crater presented a profound and frustrating puzzle. The amount of glass present in the Atacama suggested a very large energy release, an event that should have produced a significant crater, perhaps several kilometers in diameter. Yet, the landscape showed no signs of such a feature. The mystery of the Atacama glass had deepened. They had evidence of a massive high-temperature melting event, spread over a 75-kilometer corridor, but with no discernible terrestrial cause and no impact crater. What kind of event could possibly generate the heat of an atomic bomb over such a vast area, melting the desert surface into a sea of twisted glass, without leaving the physical scar of an impact? The solution to this paradox would require a shift in thinking, looking not down at the ground for a crater, but up into the sky, for a different kind of cosmic assailant. The answer, it turned out, was not an object that had hit the Earth, but one that had exploded just above it. The investigation into the origin of the Atacama desert glass had reached a perplexing impasse. The evidence on the ground pointed unequivocally to a cataclysmic, high-temperature event that had melted the desert floor in situ. Yet the most likely terrestrial and extraterrestrial causes had been systematically ruled out. There was no volcano of the correct age. A grass fire could not account for the sheer volume and temperature of formation, and most frustratingly, a thorough search had yielded no impact crater. The mystery required a new hypothesis, one that could explain the immense energy release without a corresponding physical impact. The scientific team, led by researchers from Brown University, began to explore a more nuanced and complex cosmic scenario: a massive thermal airburst caused by an exploding comet. To prove this theory, they would need to find a different kind of evidence, not a giant hole in the ground, but a microscopic, extraterrestrial fingerprint embedded within the glass itself. The subsequent analysis would provide a smoking gun, revealing that the glass was not just a geological curiosity, but a relic of a fiery encounter with a visitor from the outer solar system. The first step in this new phase of the investigation was to look at the glass with an unprecedented level of detail. The researchers collected numerous samples from different locations within the 75-kilometer-long corridor and brought them back to the laboratory. Using powerful scanning electron microscopes, they began to examine the internal structure of the glass, searching for any foreign materials that might have been incorporated into it during its violent formation. This microscopic search soon yielded its first extraordinary result. Embedded within the dark silicate matrix of the glass, like insects trapped in amber, were tiny crystalline fragments of minerals. These were not minerals that belonged in the desert sand. They were something alien to the local geology. Many of these embedded fragments, which scientists refer to as mineral inclusions, showed clear signs of thermal shock and partial melting. Their edges were rounded and decomposed, indicating that they had been exposed to the same intense heat that had formed the surrounding glass. This was a crucial observation, as it proved that these mineral fragments were not later contaminants that had settled on the glass, but were present at the very moment of its creation, caught up in the fiery maelstrom. The team set about identifying these strange minerals using techniques like energy-dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, which can determine the elemental composition of a microscopic sample. The results were startling. They identified a suite of exotic minerals that are exceptionally rare in terrestrial rocks, but are well-known components of extraterrestrial materials. One of the most significant of these was cubonite, an iron-copper sulfide. While cubonite can be found on Earth, it is typically formed under specific high-pressure, high-temperature conditions deep within the planet's crust or in hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Finding it in a surface deposit in the Atacama was highly anomalous. However, cubonite is a common accessory mineral found in certain types of meteorites, particularly a class known as carbonaceous chondrites, which are believed to be some of the most primitive materials in our solar system. The discovery of partially melted cubonite within the Atacama glass was the first strong piece of evidence pointing towards an extraterrestrial source for the heat that formed it. It was a microscopic fingerprint left behind by the cosmic perpetrator. This initial discovery spurred a more intensive search for other extraterrestrial markers. The team meticulously analyzed more samples and began to build a comprehensive inventory of the mineral inclusions. Their findings solidified the extraterrestrial connection. They identified other sulfide minerals like troilite, another iron sulfide that is a hallmark of meteoritic material. They also found evidence of metallic iron-nickel alloys in compositions that are characteristic of meteorites. But the most compelling evidence came from the discovery of fragments that closely resembled minerals and inclusions found in comets. These included complex assemblages rich in calcium and aluminum, known as calcium-aluminium-rich inclusions, CAIs. CAIs are among the oldest solid materials in the solar system, thought to have condensed directly from the hot gas of the solar nebula, as the planets were first forming. They are found in primitive meteorites and, crucially, they have been identified in samples of cometary dust. This connection to comets was the key that unlocked the entire mystery. To confirm it, the researchers compared the specific mineralogy and chemical composition of the inclusions in the Atacama glass to a unique and invaluable dataset: the samples returned by NASA's Stardust mission. The Stardust spacecraft, launched in 1999, had performed a daring flyby of a comet named Wild 2. It had successfully captured tiny particles of dust from the comet's Comet, the cloud of gas and dust that surrounds its nucleus, and returned them to Earth for analysis. This was the first time scientists had been able to study pristine material from a known comet in the laboratory. The comparison was a breakthrough. The combination of exotic minerals, the specific types of sulfides, and the presence of CAIs found embedded in the Atacama glass showed a remarkable and statistically significant match to the composition of the dust from Comet Wild 2. The evidence was now overwhelming. The Atacama glass was undeniably the product of an extraterrestrial event, and the chemical fingerprint pointed specifically to a cometary body. The minerals found in the glass were not just from any meteorite. They were from an object with the distinct chemical makeup of a comet. This explained everything. A comet is not a solid rocky body like an asteroid. It is a dirty snowball, a loose agglomeration of ice, dust, and rock, held together by frozen gases. When a body with this fragile composition enters the Earth's atmosphere at hypersonic speed, it is subjected to immense pressure and friction. Unlike a dense iron meteorite, which might survive the journey to the ground, a fragile cometary body is likely to break apart and explode violently in the air, long before it ever reaches the surface. This phenomenon is known as an airburst. The airburst hypothesis perfectly resolved the central paradox of the Atacama glass: the evidence of immense heat without an impact crater. As the comet, or perhaps a swarm of fragments from a larger parent comet, streaked through the atmosphere, it would have disintegrated in a series of massive explosions. This airburst would have released an enormous amount of energy in the form of a superheated thermal pulse, a wave of incandescent plasma and radiation that would have raced towards the ground at the speed of light. This searing wave of heat, reaching temperatures of thousands of degrees Celsius, would have instantly and simultaneously melted the surface of the desert sand across a vast, elongated area corresponding to the comet's trajectory, a 75-kilometer-long corridor. The molten sand, whipped into bizarre shapes by the turbulent, hurricane-force winds generated by the explosion, would then have cooled rapidly to form the twisted, folded fields of glass we see today. The tiny mineral fragments from the vaporized comet itself would have been mixed into this molten silica, becoming forever trapped within the glass as a permanent record of the event. This scenario explains why there is no crater. The destructive force was delivered not by a solid impact, but by a massive release of thermal energy in the atmosphere. The event would have been more akin to a series of massive, naturally occurring thermonuclear bombs detonating at high altitude than to a cannonball striking the ground. The famous 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia, which flattened over 800 square miles of forest, is now understood to have been a similar, though smaller, airburst from a meteor or comet. The Atacama event, given the vast quantity of glass produced, was likely far more energetic. The scientific detective story was complete. The strange fields of glass were not the result of volcanoes, grass fires, or a conventional impact. They were the glassy scars of a comet that had exploded in the sky, a fiery rain of extraterrestrial material that had flash-fried the surface of the desert. The smoking gun was not a crater, but a microscopic collection of alien minerals, the last vestiges of a visitor from the depths of space. The scientific confirmation that the Atacama glass was formed by a massive cometary airburst was a stunning geological discovery. It solved the long-standing mystery of the glass fields and provided a dramatic new chapter in the Earth's history of cosmic encounters. However, the significance of this event extends far beyond the realm of geology. The dating of the glass to approximately 12,000 years ago places the cataclysm at a pivotal and fascinating moment in the story of both the planet's environment and its earliest human inhabitants. This was not an event that occurred in a sterile, lifeless void. 12,000 years ago, at the very end of the last ice age, the Atacama Desert was a profoundly different place than it is today. It was a landscape teeming with life, a mosaic of wetlands and woodlands that supported a diverse megafauna and, crucially, some of the very first groups of hunter-gatherers to populate South America. The fiery rain from the exploding comet did not fall on an empty desert. It fell on a living, breathing ecosystem, and its impact would have been nothing short of apocalyptic. The cometary airburst was not just a geological event, it was an extinction event, a moment of sudden and violent transformation that left a permanent scar not only on the landscape, but also on the history of life and human settlement in the region. To understand the full impact of the Atacama airburst, it is essential to peel back the modern veneer of hyperaridity and reconstruct the environment of the past. The end of the Pleistocene epoch, often referred to as the Late Glacial Period, was a time of dramatic global climate change. As the great continental ice sheets of the northern hemisphere retreated, weather patterns shifted across the globe. In South America, this led to a period of increased moisture in many regions that are now desert. Paleoclimatological evidence, gathered from sources like ancient lake sediments, pack rat middens, fossilized nests containing plant material, and pollen analysis, paints a clear picture of a much wetter and greener Atacama around 12,000 to 13,000 years ago. The area that is now a barren, dusty plain was then a landscape of seasonal wetlands, shallow lakes and oases, fed by increased rainfall and meltwater from the Andes. This network of water sources supported a surprisingly rich ecosystem. Instead of a barren wasteland, it was a puna grassland or a sparse pampa woodland, dotted with shrubs and trees that could thrive in a semi-arid environment. This habitable landscape supported a diverse and impressive array of megafaunate large animals that were characteristic of the Pleistocene. The fossil record from the region confirms the presence of creatures like giant ground sloths, ancient species of horses, and large camelids like the paleolama. These large herbivores would have been, in turn, prey for formidable predators. The Atacama of 12,000 years ago was a vibrant, functioning ecosystem, a place of significant biological productivity. It was into this world that the first humans arrived. The earliest archaeological sites in South America date to this period, and the Atacama was no exception. Evidence from sites like Quebrada Jagüey and Quebrada Tacaway in nearby Peru confirms that small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers were already living along the coast and in the inland oases. These early peoples, known to archaeologists as Paleo-Indians, were skilled hunters and foragers, perfectly adapted to this late glacial environment. They hunted the megafauna, fished in the coastal waters, and gathered the edible plants that grew around the wetlands. The 75-kilometer corridor where the glass fields are now found was, at that time, likely a prime habitat, a fertile and resource-rich zone that would have been an attractive area for human settlement. It was upon this living, populated world that the cometary catastrophe was unleashed. The event itself would have been almost beyond human comprehension. A large comet or a swarm of cometary fragments would have entered the Earth's atmosphere at an incredible velocity, likely exceeding 40,000 miles per hour. As it streaked across the sky, it would have appeared as a dazzling, terrifying new star, brighter than the sun, visible even in broad daylight. Then, as the atmospheric pressure overwhelmed its fragile structure, it would have detonated in a series of brilliant, silent flashes high in the atmosphere. The silence would have been momentary. The explosions would have generated a series of powerful sonic booms that would have rolled across the landscape like the crack of doom, powerful enough to deafen and disorient any creature for miles around. The most devastating effects, however, would have come from the thermal pulse. The airburst would have released a wave of intense, searing heat, a blast of radiation that would have raced towards the ground. The temperature of this thermal wave would have been thousands of degrees Celsius. The effect on the ecosystem within the 75-kilometer corridor would have been instantaneous and absolute. Every tree, every shrub, every blade of grass would have been incinerated, turned to ash in a fraction of a second. The wetlands and shallow lakes would have boiled away, their water vaporizing instantly. The very soil would have been superheated, its surface layer melting into the molten, twisted glass that we find today. Any animal caught in the Opina giant sloth, a herd of ancient horses, or a group of foraging humans would have been vaporized where they stood, leaving no trace behind. It was a sterilizing event, an act of cosmic cleansing by fire that wiped the slate of life completely clean across a vast swathe of the landscape. The timing of this catastrophic event, established through argon dating of the glass to be approximately 12,000 years ago, aligns with chilling precision with a major turning point in the region's archaeological and paleontological records. In the specific area covered by the glass fields, the evidence for both megafauna and a significant human presence, which was present just before this date, abruptly disappears right at the 12,000-year mark. The fossil record goes silent. The archaeological sites are abandoned. The once fertile corridor becomes a sterile, glassy wasteland. This correlation is too strong to be a coincidence. The cometary airburst was not just a geological spectacle. It was a localized extinction event. It provides a direct and dramatic explanation for the sudden disappearance of life in this part of the Atacama. While a broader, continent-wide extinction of megafauna was occurring around this time due to larger climate shifts and human hunting pressures, the airburst event represents a specific regional catastrophe that wiped out an entire local ecosystem in a single fiery moment. For any human groups who were living on the periphery of the blast zone, the experience would have been unimaginably terrifying. Even miles away from the main corridor, they would have witnessed the blinding flash and felt the searing heat. The explosions would have generated hurricane-force winds that would have flattened everything in their path. The sky would have darkened with smoke and ash, and the air would have been filled with the smell of burning. They would have witnessed a familiar life-sustaining landscape transformed, in a matter of minutes, into a smoldering glass-strewn desert. This experience would have been a profound and terrifying trauma, an event that would have been seared into the collective memory of the survivors for generations. The long-term consequences of the airburst would have been just as significant. The event had rendered a large and previously productive territory completely uninhabitable. It was now a sterile wasteland devoid of water, plants, or animals. This would have had a major impact on the settlement and migration patterns of the early hunter-gatherer populations. They would have been forced to abandon this cursed land and move to other areas, a displacement that would have had cascading effects, potentially leading to increased competition and conflict with other groups. The event may have created a no-go zone, an area that was feared and avoided for centuries. It is also highly likely that such a dramatic and terrifying celestial event would have been incorporated into the oral traditions and mythologies of the surviving peoples. While we have no direct written records from this deep past, many cultures around the world have myths that speak of fire from the sky, of stars that fall, or of a time when the sun fell to the earth. These stories are often dismissed as pure fantasy, but discoveries like the Atacama airburst suggest that some of them may be the distorted, mythologized memories of real, catastrophic cosmic events. The story of a god who scoured the earth with fire, or of a sacred but forbidden land, could be the 12,000-year-old echo of the day the comet exploded. The Atacama glass is, therefore, more than just a geological curiosity. It is a scar on the landscape that tells the story of profound and violent change. It is direct physical evidence of a cosmic event that instantly wiped out an entire ecosystem, reshaping the environment and profoundly impacting the course of early human settlement in South America. It is a powerful reminder that our planet's history is not a slow, uniform process, but one that is punctuated by sudden, catastrophic events from the sky. Events that have the power to change the world in the blink of an eye. The Atacama glass is more than a geological curiosity. It is a scar from a violent cosmic encounter, providing direct evidence of an event that instantly wiped out an ecosystem and may have profoundly shaped the course of early human settlement. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. Stay curious, question everything, and remember the truth is often buried deeper than we think.